Hey everybody, my name is Neil Malek, and this session is called an owner's guide or an owner's manual for new SharePoint site owners. So we're talking about Microsoft SharePoint today. I will be doing all of my demonstrations using the Office 365 version of SharePoint. So, if you have SharePoint 2010 or 13 at your office, your buttons will be in slightly different locations, but overall, the basic premise of what we're doing has always been the same in SharePoint. So you'll be able to get a lot of good information and best practices from this session, regardless of what version of SharePoint you actually have. If you've never heard me talk before, this is me, Neil Malek. I'm a Microsoft certified trainer. I have two things that I think you should reference after today's session is over. First, if you want to ask any follow-up questions at all, just email help@nactraining.com. That's my company. And secondly, I do have a YouTube channel where I have a ton of tutorials up. Some of them are SharePoint, some are Excel, PowerPoint, etc. So just youtube.com/myname. Feel free to use those as resources after today's session is over. Additionally, everybody should have a copy of the PDF that goes along with this session, basically just outlining the various different aspects that we're going to be talking about in today's session and giving you screenshots that you can reference when you're not in front of the video. So in this session, my goal is to build up a simple structure that starts with, of course, understanding SharePoint. Unfortunately, for better or worse, usually worse, most people who have been given a SharePoint site don't really understand what SharePoint is, what it can do, what it can't do, best practices, any of that stuff. So we want to make sure that as SharePoint site owners that we really have a good grasp on what we should be doing and the tools that are at our disposal. Now, one of the things, of course, that we've got to make sure of within SharePoint is as we are putting information into SharePoint, as we are putting up websites that describe things, as we're working with files and things like that, we need to guarantee that within the company, certain people do have permission to do things and other people don't have permission to do things. And so we need to be in complete control of that basic concept. So once we have that, we have a SharePoint site and we have the permissions set up, we need to give our users, and users are everybody else on our team who's trying to work on this information, who's trying to communicate, those sorts of things, that they have the right tools for the job. And SharePoint has a ton of tools in it, so we want to be able to identify the types of tools that we can use and how we can best make those available to our team members. And finally, and this is the single most important element in SharePoint. So I don't know how many of you guys were in the room or nearby when the decision making was happening with regards to SharePoint at your company. But let's be very clear, SharePoint is not a cheap investment for your company. It was an outlay of cost, and it's either you're paying for it by user or you're paying for it by install, and there's a ton of investment into this. And unfortunately, most teams aren't making good use of SharePoint at all. In fact, some of them aren't making use of SharePoint at all, even in the slightest. And the biggest reason for that is because people are intimidated by or confused by SharePoint. So as a SharePoint site owner, our really number one goal is to make it as easy as possible on the people on our team so that they can do their job, so they can invest some time and energy into this. So let's start off with the base of this, and I want to make it all the way up to the top of the pyramid in this session. Let's talk about what SharePoint actually is. If I want to make a simple, watered down definition of what SharePoint is, it's a tool that Microsoft has given us, and this tool is used to build websites. So think about the websites that you use every day. You use websites like Google to find things. You use websites like airline websites or travel websites to book travel. You use websites to be able to find files, maybe download those files, to be able to interact with different governmental organizations. There's a ton of different things that you use websites for every single day. And SharePoint is just a tool that allows us to build those websites. And they can accomplish basically anything that we want them to accomplish within our business environment. Now, let's really look at the end of that definition, though. If these websites can accomplish basically any business task, so let's think of that through, working on files or talking with our coworkers or helping to build proposals or make decisions within the business, all these things can be encompassed within SharePoint. Any business task, that is, we want to collaborate, communicate, we want to build community internally, we want to track our projects, we want to have a wiki, we want to push business intelligence to the people who are trying to make decisions, we want to allow for e-discovery during our legal filings. All of these things are possible within SharePoint, which means that when people are given SharePoint and they're told, you can do anything you want with this, their eyes start to dart around and they start thinking about, like, okay, well, do they mean this, but also this other thing? Like, I could build a communication website, but I could also collaborate with my coworkers, or I could make a website that my clients would access, or something that my vendors would interact with. This is the problem, okay? The problem is Microsoft built a tool that is so powerful and so overarching within our business that it's almost impossible for us to pin down what it is we can or should do, what we want to do, what would be valuable. And so most people's SharePoint sites are either one of two different things. They're either the Wild West, and people are doing 32,000 different things that have absolutely nothing to do with each other, or their SharePoint sites are ghost towns. There is nothing happening in there because everybody's so confused by the scope of SharePoint that they're like, I don't even know where to start, so I'm just not going to use it. And think about that from the perspective of a real stakeholder in your business, okay? Somebody at your business decided that it would be valuable to spend the money and get SharePoint, bring it into your company, and give your team those tools. But instead, everybody's looking at it, intimidated, and says, well, I don't really need to use it, so I'm not going to go in there. That's our problem. So if you are a SharePoint site owner, or at least if you're some sort of stakeholder in this, it's your job to do 4 things. Here are the 4 things you need to do. You need to figure out within your business the sorts of things that are difficult, that are challenging. I always go to businesses and they have these stories about things like, okay, so what we do is we send this document to somebody, they print it out, they sign it, then they scan it back in and send it back to us via email, and then we print out a copy and we sign it, and I'm just like, oh my goodness, why would you do that? Or, well, we have this shared network drive where we keep all of our files, but, about every 6 months, somebody copies over a file, so we have to make sure that we have a backup copy someplace. All those things, those are challenges within your business that could be handled so much more effectively. And SharePoint gives you the tools to accomplish those types of tasks. So it's your job to say, okay, this big sticking point here, this workflow that we have inside of our business, we're going to attack this problem specifically. And what we're going to do is we're going to grab the right tools. We're going to set up the permissions the right way so that people can do that job, so people can complete that task really easily. And in fact, you want to make it as easy as possible for them. And then when you've built that, when you say to yourself, we had this problem, we built this tool that solves the problem, then you want to make sure that you turn around to your coworkers and say, no, guys, everybody sitting in a room with me for 15 minutes and I'll show you. And you promote it to them. You show them exactly how easy it is to go from A to B to C within that business process so that they latch onto it. Anytime you have a problem like this, where you have something that has too many features, you need to identify a couple of really game-changing features for you, for your business, for your team within the company. And you need to say, okay, we are going to use this thing and it's going to be great. And you make sure to bring everybody along with you. So that's what we're going to try to do here today, is make sure that we know what types of things work better with SharePoint, what tools we can use to make that happen, and how to make it as easy as possible for people to get around. So item number one, some of the tasks that are just way easier when you use SharePoint are people working on the same files. In fact, in the newer versions of SharePoint, there's this thing called co-authoring, where 2 or 5 or 7 people can have the same document open at the same time, and you can see what the other people are doing within that document, and you can see them make changes, and you can have a conversation right there in the file that says, oh, hey, here's what I was thinking. So anytime that you're talking about collaborating on files, it's way easier in SharePoint. Being able to provide information to the rest of the team, like if you've got a contact list of vendors or something like that, you absolutely should be putting that into SharePoint. One of my favorite parts of this is, you know how most of your decision making right now is happening via email? And if somebody was to ask you the details of a particular decision that was made, you'd kind of have to go into your inbox and scan through there. If all your decision making is happening in SharePoint, then when somebody new joins a team or when they come back from vacation, it's incredibly easy for them to figure out what happened while they were gone. And then really being able as a department or as a team to publish things for people who use your team and your company. So let's say you work with HR, right? There's a ton of forms, there's a ton of FAQs about benefits and things like that that you as HR need to be able to provide to the other people outside your department. And so SharePoint is a fantastic place for hosting all of that really useful information, so people can get what they need and move on, and you have to do a lot less work interacting with people, right? You just put the information in SharePoint in an effective way, making it easy on them, and life is good. Okay, so those are some tasks that you should immediately identify as low-hanging fruit. Those are things that we can immediately do. So what tools do we have at our disposal? So again, SharePoint is a tool that allows you to build websites. So your number one tool is your SharePoint site. Let's talk about your SharePoint site in the abstract here. First of all, probably somebody on the IT staff, somebody on the SharePoint team at your company is going to make your SharePoint site for you. And it's going to be for a department or an office or a team within your company that all need to work on something together. So a common example of the address of that would be like the company name.sharepoint.com/site/ whatever the name of your department is, or whatever the name of your team is, things like that. That would be a very common address where you'd find your SharePoint site. So when people go to your SharePoint site, think of that as being sort of the home page, But then when people need to be able to work on files together, or they need to be able to share information about vendors, or they need to be able to have a conversation, there are two major elements that live in a SharePoint site. One is called a list. The other one's called a library. So a list, you could think of a few of these. They're in your Outlook right now, like your contact list or your task list, right? And if you have a contact list, you could also make a list of employees, or a list of vendors, or a list of contractors, or whatever list of people or companies that you want to interact with. Those are obvious. You could also make up like a custom list, something like, here's a list of all of our office locations. And there's other things that are lists too that you don't normally think of as being lists, like calendars are really just lists of things that happen on dates and times, right? So a list is it's a list, right, of different entries. And this could be literally any type of entry that you can imagine. Contact lists and task lists, those sort of make sense because you use them all the time in your Outlook. But the other type of thing that you have in your SharePoint site is something called a library. And a library is for documents, right? So you have a document library, or a form library, or an archive library, or a report library, or sometimes people just put pictures up there. If you wanted to be able to hold all the pictures from your last company picnic, you could make a picture library and put all your files into that library. So lists have entries, right? Have records in them, have contacts or tasks or meetings or those sorts of things. And libraries hold files. So most of the time, for collaboration, you're going to find people using the document libraries, right? Document libraries are where you go in and you say, oh, here's where our spreadsheets are being held, or here's where our slide decks are being held. So this is where we're going to collaborate on those entries. Somebody like Human Resources, they might have a form library. Here's the insurance form. Here's a 401k form. Anything that you want to sign up for, here are the forms that you need. You might also have a contact list. We've been talking about that, the vendor lists and things like that. And then ultimately, whatever you've got in your SharePoint site, whatever people are interacting with, whatever people are using to get their job done, you also need to make sure that that whole thing is wrapped up in the right kind of permissions. And permissions are who has the right to do different things on the SharePoint site. So let's begin the hands-on portion of this course with the understanding that somebody in IT has probably created our SharePoint site for us and then given us the keys to it. As you can see up in the top left-hand corner of my screen, this is a fake company called Anderson Wiley. And after the SharePoint.com, we have /sites/HR. This is a human resources SharePoint site. Now, the first thing we're going to want to make sure of is before we put any content into our SharePoint site, we need to guarantee that the right people have access and the wrong people don't have access to the content that's going in here. So let's take a look at how that can be adjusted. We change the permissions on our SharePoint site by clicking the gear in the top right-hand corner. Now, if you have an earlier version of SharePoint, you'll see something like Site Settings available to you. But here in Office 365, notice I've got this ability to go straight to my site permissions. So I'll click on the site permissions, and the first thing it does in Office 365 is give me simply the basic concept of how permissions are handled in this SharePoint environment. Notice here that we have three groups of people identified as the owners of the site, the members of the site, and the visitors of the site. We'll be able to take this far beyond where we are right now. But this basic concept is the basic concept that all of our permissions on all of our SharePoint sites is based around. Owners of a SharePoint site, as you can see there, have something called full control, which means they can get in here and change permissions, they can make stuff and delete stuff, they can do basically anything they want to the SharePoint site. Members, on the other hand, have this level of permissions called edit rights. And we'll see what that means here in a second, but basically the idea here is that you can contribute to the SharePoint site. You can put new things in, you can change the files that are in there, you can edit the files or delete the files. And of course, visitors to your SharePoint site shouldn't be given that level of access. They should just be able to see that things exist. So visitors typically have what's called read access to the SharePoint site. But let's take a closer look at what's going on here. If we go to Advanced Permission Settings, you see that the page changes, and those of you who've got an older version of SharePoint, this is what you'll be thrown into right away. The Members group, the Owners group, and the Visitors group. Owners, again, with full control, Members with edit control, and Visitors with read control. If we're concerned about who the members of my SharePoint site are, you can click on that group, Human Resources Members, and you can see who's in there. Well, look at that. Everybody, basically, everybody at the company except for external users by default is part of the members group. That might not be a good idea, honestly. This might be something we want to go back and fix. Let's click the back button to go back to our permissions. So we have 3 different groups of people, and each of them is being given a permission level. Really, the first thing we need to understand is, what does edit right actually give you? What does read rights actually give you? To see that, we can click on Permission Levels up here at the top of the panel. And by going into permission levels, you can see that SharePoint automatically gives you 5 different levels that are possible. Now, the other thing I want you to pay attention to is that these are all something that we can come in and make changes to, and that we can make new permission levels as well. Let's take a look at full control. If we look at full control, you'll notice there's a series of checkboxes, and they are all checked. You'll also notice that you cannot change what these are that are checked, and that's because this is what an administrator on the SharePoint site can do. You don't want to be able to take away permissions from an administrator. If we go to design rights, again, we'll see a series of checkboxes, but this time around, because these people aren't the administrators, these aren't the owners of the SharePoint site, they're just people who are designers on the SharePoint site, we can decide which checkboxes are checked and which aren't. And the same thing goes for both edit and contribute rights within the site as well. So we saw that a lot of people within our enterprise have edit rights on the SharePoint site. Let's see what they can actually do here. If you're an editor on the SharePoint site, you can create new lists and delete lists, change the columns that are in that list, change the views that are in that list. Of course, you can add new files, you can edit those files, you can delete those files. You can also take a look at all the versions of those files and get rid of some of them if you want, and set up alerts for yourself. But because you're not an administrator, because you're not a site owner, if you have these edit rights, you don't have the ability to do things like create new groups of people, or right down here, enumerate new permissions. So it's a typically good idea to keep all of the different permission levels that Microsoft gives you by default exactly the way they are, so that somebody else who's coming in here doesn't get confused that 2 different permission levels name the same thing, have 2 different possibilities. For further details on how to choose the right permission level from these options, make sure you check the PDF. It's got a simple guide in there as to what each one of these different levels is capable of, and so you can very easily decide what to assign to different groups of users. However, you're definitely at some point in the process going to feel that you have a scenario that is different from anything that Microsoft has already set us up for. And so it might be time to make a new permission level. So while we're here, if you click on add a permission level, you can, as you would imagine, invent a new permission level for a group of people. So what kinds of things might be suitable for this new permission level? Well, one idea that always comes up is if you have a group of people within the organization, maybe they're interns or they're junior level people, basically a group of people within the organization who have been tasked with, for example, uploading a lot of documents, but you need to make sure that they can't accidentally edit or delete something. They should not have the necessary rights to edit files or delete files, those sorts of things. So inventing a permission level for something like, let's say, add only, right? This would be the type of person who would be able to add material but not be able to edit or delete material. Now, you probably want to give it a good description. So this will be something like permission level for users who upload but cannot edit or delete material. Now, what are we going to do for this permission level? What's our setup going to be? Well, if I scroll down here a little bit, I can see that Add Items has its own checkbox. And of course, I definitely want this to happen, but maybe I'm a little intimidated by all these checkboxes, and I'm worried that I won't click the right checkbox. Well, the nice thing about setting up your permissions in SharePoint is, let's say the only thing you know is that these people should be able to upload files. If I click the checkbox for Add Items, notice that it also clicks the checkbox for them being able to view things, right? You have to be able to see things in order to know what to upload next. Right down here to view the pages that everything's on, and right down here to be able to open the website altogether. So Microsoft automatically clicks the necessary checkboxes for the level that you really need here. And you probably don't want to add any more checkboxes at this point. Okay, so we come down here to the bottom and click Create. And at that point, we have invented a new permission level called Add Only. You can see it right there. And you can see that it is a permission level for users who upload but cannot edit or delete materials. But this is just a permission level. This is a possibility. It hasn't yet been applied to anybody in our organization. So for that, let's go back to the permissions link over here on the left, and let's investigate some more about how permissions are set up here. So notice here that we have been dealing with the permission levels, and right now the permission levels of edit, full control, and read have been applied to something called a group. In SharePoint, your basic elements for managing permissions are a user comes to the SharePoint site. That user is part of a group of users, and that group of users has a specific permission level that they are permitted to use. Now, it may be tempting to take every individual person who comes to your site and assign them a permission level, but that is really daunting when it comes to trying to manage everybody's permissions later on down the line. The right way to go is always to create a group of people who have a certain permission level and then put people into that group. So let's take a look at how we make a new group. So you already have members, owners, and visitors. And no matter what site you're given, you'll always have members, owners, and visitors. But now we have this new concept where we have a group of people who can add things. So I'll go over here and click on Create Group. And you saw there that my groups were all called Human Resources and then something. So let's go ahead and stick with that naming convention so that when people look at these groups, they know that this group was invented for the Human Resources site. So this is the Human Resources Upload Users. And the About Me would be something like those users who can upload but not edit or delete. Okay, next up, SharePoint's asking me who the owner of this group is. And the owner of the group is the person or people who are capable of changing things about this group, like who's in it, what they can do, that sort of thing. Now, it immediately assigns my address, my account with this, but I don't want that at all because maybe I'm going to get reassigned to some new group someplace. I don't want to have ownership rights over this group. I want everybody who is an owner in the SharePoint site, in the human resources site, to be the owner of the upload users. So I'm going to click the little X here next to the group owner, not assign it to myself, but instead look for human resources. Here we go. Human resources owners. So whoever's in the owners group, and this will change over time, right? People will come, people will go, and whoever's in the owners group at any point in time, those are the people who are capable of putting people in the upload group or changing what the upload group can do, or even deleting the group altogether. Who can view the membership of the group. Every once in a while, you'll have a group where the people in that group should be secretive, right? And so only the members of the group should be able to see who's a member of the group. But that's not really relevant for most situations. And then this one is a big one for me. Who can edit the membership of the group? Well, the owner should be the one who decides who's in the group and who's out of the group. Do we want to allow requests to join or leave the group? Basically, if somebody comes across a page and they try to do something and they don't have the right access rights, it'll say, hey, do you want to email the owner of this group and ask to join? I don't typically have that set up because I think if somebody new joins the group, I'll know about it and I'll add those people. Okay, so the last thing we've got to do right down here, give permissions. And these people can add only. So that permission level right there that we just invented is now applied to this group of people who can upload. I click on create and it says, okay, great. I made a group for you called Human Resources Upload Users. And right now you're the only person who's in the group. So let's add some new people to the group. I'll go to the little new drop-down menu here, hit add users, and I'll add, let's say that Alejandro Ochoa and maybe Brian. All right, so BRI, so there's Brian Gagnon. Okay, so they will be people who are upload users. You see here, should I include a personal message? And right down here for show options, I can decide to include an email invitation or not include an email invitation. So typically I would say it's a good idea to send an email to people as they join the SharePoint site. But on the flip side, if you are throwing people in new groups left and right, it might be a little bit too much for everybody to get back to their inbox and go, why do I have 7 different emails about joining this group? So make sure that you make a conscious decision as to whether to send this as an email invitation or not. So for this purpose, I'm going to not send the email invitation. Click share. And I have just changed who is a part of the upload users group. I can just as easily now go over to the members group, right? In the members group, we saw earlier that literally everybody in the entire company is a member of the members group. Maybe I think that's a terrible idea. So I'll click the checkbox there for everyone except external users. And on my actions drop-down menu here, you see here I can take those people out of the group and click OK. For the owners group, who should be an owner of the SharePoint site? Maybe in the owners group, I'll go to new and I'll add Jacqueline Oswalt and I'll add Jun Yu as owners of the SharePoint site. And again, show options. Do I want to send an email invite or not? Maybe not. Click share. So all I'm doing here is going group by group and deciding who's in the group and who's out of the group. Maybe on my visitors now, on the other hand, I actually do want to add literally everybody in the company as a visitor to the SharePoint site. So I'll go to new, I'll hit add users, and here if I just type in EVER, there it is, everyone or everyone except external users. Maybe everyone except external users. And I definitely don't want to send an email invitation to literally everybody in the company at this point. So I'll uncheck that checkbox for send an email invitation. Click share. And there it is. I have contributed to each of the different groups. In my upload users group, I have Alejandro and Brian. In my owners group, I have Jacqueline and June. In my members group, I have everybody in human resources. And in my visitors group, I have everybody else in the company. Now that we have our permissions all figured out, let's go back to the SharePoint site itself and talk about how people are going to be interacting with this site. So anytime that you are navigating through the SharePoint environment, make sure that you recognize where your home link is to go back to the actual site itself, or right up here, the icon for your human resources site will also take you back to that home page. So this is our SharePoint homepage, and as you can see, there is a bunch of stuff in the middle part of this homepage, as well as a little navigational structure over here on the left-hand side. Let's begin by talking about all the contents of the SharePoint site. If you remember our slide from earlier, every SharePoint site is composed of different lists and libraries for the jobs that we want to do. So I can click on the link here for Site Contents, and I can see the different lists and libraries that are already in place. Notice here that basically everything is a library here. And really the only thing that we're dealing with right now is that this SharePoint site has a document library called Documents. So let's think this all the way through. If this is our Human Resources SharePoint site, and people are going to be coming here to be able to interact with the forms to register for different benefits, if they want to be able to see the full details of their benefits, or see the details of how decisions are made internally about who gets hired, or we want to be able to collaborate on future versions of these same documents, things like that, then we need lists and libraries to accomplish those tasks. When I look at my site contents and I realize that I need a new list or I need a new library, I can click on the New button up here and notice that I have options for lists, for libraries, and also for apps. We're going to ignore, for the moment, subsites and pages. So when I click on App right here, I want you to notice that the panel that comes up includes both document libraries and lists like task lists and things like that. So let's go back for a moment. For those of you who have older versions of SharePoint, you will only see the opportunity to make lists or to make libraries. But then in Excel 2013, Microsoft sort of looked around and said, you know what, everybody's calling stuff apps nowadays. So why don't we go ahead and package all the lists and libraries under the umbrella term of app? Now, the unfortunate thing, of course, is that now when you look at how to make something new in SharePoint, you can choose list, you can choose library, or you can choose app, which is, of course, a list or a library, which doesn't make any sense at all. I wish they would simplify things for us. I apologize for this. What I want to make sure that you understand at this point is that if you're not already aware of this, I don't get paid by Microsoft. So my job is to make this as easy for you to understand as possible. So when you see things like this that are in conflict with one another, I want to call that out and help you sort of wrap your head around it a bit. So really, when it comes time for us to make new lists and new libraries in SharePoint to be able to get different jobs done, I will typically just click on New and choose App here and allow myself to build any list or any library that I have in mind. Okay, so let's say that we have a library in mind for the different benefits information. Let's not go benefits, let's go retirement library, and also another library for health benefits, for medical benefits, and other things like that. So I can click here on Document Library, and when I click on the Document Library, I can name this library something like Retirement Benefits, and click Create. And immediately you are given a new retirement benefits document library right here in your site contents. And I can keep going from here. Click on New, choose App, and maybe now I want a new document library for health benefits. And click Create. So now I have a library for retirement benefits and another one for health benefits. And maybe when our health benefits change, what we'd like to do is, just in case somebody was on the old retirement system or on the old health system and they got grandfathered in or something, and those documents needed to stay around, let's go to New, and let's choose to make a new app and make a new document library called Archived Benefit Information, and click on Create. And so now people should be able to go to retirement benefits to read up on their current retirement benefits, health benefits to read up on their health benefits, and of course to the archive if they realize that they were on some sort of benefit system last year that was different from what it is this year. So you have document libraries for those different concepts. And let's say in addition to that, you also want to be able to track all of the employees and their date of hire. So you could go to New, choose App, and create a new contact list. So again, lists and libraries, lists for records, libraries for documents. So here I can go in and click on my contact list type and call this one current employees, for example, and click on Create. And so now we have a list for our current employees. You can see how it's different. You see this little icon over here that looks like a contact, as opposed to retirement benefits that looks like a folder with a document in it, etc. So we can create these types of elements. I think it's relatively self-explanatory to say what we would do with the contact list. Let's go to current employees right here. And as you can see, I can either add my current employees one item at a time, or I can click on Edit This List and fill in information like last name and first name and phone number and email address. And again, when I go back to my site contents in the same way, when I go to my retirement benefits, I can decide within my retirement benefits to create a new Word document, a new Excel spreadsheet, or to upload a document from someplace on my hard drive. So we've created these different elements for people to be able to interact with. But there is another level to interacting with these lists and libraries. And that is, we could decide what view these lists and libraries have. So let's go back to site contents for a moment and discuss this for a second. So I go to my current employees list right here in site contents. And I think to myself, how is it that people are really going to interact with this list of current employees? Because they're current employees, does it make sense for them to see last name, first name, company? Maybe that's kind of irrelevant. Now, I don't necessarily need to remove the company field because, maybe I have multiple companies under my umbrella, those sorts of things. But I can't imagine that this is the third piece of information I need about my employees. So watch what happens here. On a list like this one, I can go to my List tab at the top of the screen, and you'll see that right underneath the List tab is this idea called a view of the list. So again, think of your job role here as a SharePoint site owner. It's your job to include things like the employee list, like health benefits library, retirement benefits library, absolutely. But it's also your job to make it easy to interact with the employee list. And if part of the employee list is irrelevant, or it's ordered in the wrong way, then it's not as easy to interact with as I would imagine. So I'm going to click here on Modify View and take a look at what's available to me. So you see here that the view of this contact list is a view called All Contacts. And that what's more, I can see that there's an address, Anderson Wiley, sharepoint.com/sites/HR/lists/current employees/all items. So this is all the employees. That's great. Notice down here, though, that I can decide with checkboxes which things to show. It's all there. All the information is there. But maybe it's not relevant in this view to show what company somebody works for. Maybe it's not relevant in this view to show what their home phone number is. But including their business phone and their email address makes a ton of sense. I'll scroll down here, notice that I could also include something like city, for example. So if it was relevant for each of these people, not necessarily to see what company they work for, but maybe just what city they work in, that could be very helpful to us. And maybe clicking on something like the job title and making that available could also be helpful to us. Okay, so we're doing pretty well here, but notice besides the checkboxes for which pieces of information about these people to show, over on the right we also have the position of what's being shown. And right now, as you would imagine, it's showing that last name is shown first, then first name, and then just sort of goes down the list automatically. But let's say that within my company, everybody is known by their first name first. I can go to the first name drop-down menu and choose to place that in front of last name. Notice here, last name now has the number 3 associated with it. And let's say before we know what their phone number, email address, or city are, we want to know what job title they've been given. I can go down here to job title and say the job title should be the 4th item to be seen. So we see first name, then last name, then job title, then maybe what city they work in. So I'll go ahead and make that the 5th entry. And finally, their business phone and their email address. So now I'll scroll down here and click OK. And notice that while I don't have anybody in the contact list as of yet, right now they're listed as first, last, job title, city, business phone, email address. That is a really nice way to make it more pleasant for your current users to interact with this. And now when they need to fill other employees in or make edits, when they click on edit this list, they're editing these fields of the people's information. So I can say that my first employee is Neil Malek, who's an instructor from Orlando, whose business phone and email address are as follows. And instantly I have that information fed into the list. I can click on stop editing the list. And the nice thing about this is that right now, if this was what was important to me, it was incredibly easy to edit that, to interact with that. Now, at any point, if I need to fill more information about Neil in, I can always hit the little ... over here and edit him directly. Go into edit item and see all the fields about what Neil is, right? All of the useful contact information. But what's most relevant to this business is first, last, job title, city, business phone, and email address. And so we've instantly made that the preferred view of this list. So while creating items like the current employee list is definitely part of your job as a site owner, being able to present the right subset of data from the current employees is just as important. In fact, let's go one level deeper than this. Let's envision a list of employees wherein we have people in different cities, in different job titles, and we want to be able to filter it to just a specific job title. So bear with me for a second. I'm going to speed up the video on this. I'm going to click on Edit this list and fill in a couple more employees. So now I'll hit stop editing this list, and as you can see, I've got some people in here, right? Now imagine that I added more and more and more people to this. Being able to see everybody is fine, but that's maybe not the most direct route to what I need to get out of this list. So instead of just having an all contacts view, maybe I would like some filtered views. Filters that show me everybody who works in Atlanta, everybody who works in Orlando, or everybody who works in New York. Now, before we move forward with this, I just want to be very clear about this. Anytime you want, you can go to the drop-down menu here for city, click the checkbox for something like Orlando, for example, and notice that only those people who work in Orlando still show up. Now, I do, though, want to be able to switch to a perfect view of the individuals that I'm looking for. So, by going to List up at the top of the screen, I can create a new view that's never been made before. Click on Create View. I'll call this view, let's see, right here it's a standard view, and I'll call this view, let's call it Atlanta. Notice that I can make this the default view. Now, I don't like to make filtered views of lists the default view, because that means that when people stumble upon the list, they're immediately only seeing a subset. And maybe that's not the right interaction. Maybe you want to see everybody, but be able to filter it down if we want. I can then create a new public view for everybody to interact with. Notice here that it's got the same basic information: first name, last name, job title, city, business phone, and email address. But right down here towards the bottom, I have the ability to filter the information based off something different. So I'll click here where it says show items only when the following is true, and I'll say look for the city field. And if the city field is equal to, let's say, Atlanta, for example, then click OK. And there you go. The Atlanta view shows only those people who work in Atlanta. I click back on the All Contacts view and I see everybody. I click on the Atlanta view and I see only those people who work in Atlanta. Let's do that 2 more quick times here. I'm going to speed the video up just a little bit so you can see this more quickly. We click OK, and now we have 4 views that we can toggle between: All Contacts, Atlanta, New York, and then when you get to a certain point, you need to hit the little ... the ellipsis button to the right, and you'll see Orlando is another view that I can switch to. So far, we've created new lists and new libraries, and we've now customized this list, right? We've changed the way the views present this list, filter this list. Let's take a look at how we might customize the libraries. Remember, the libraries are where you keep your documents. So let's say that we wanted to go over to our retirement benefits library right here. And we could definitely see ourselves uploading some files to retirement benefits. Let's go ahead and hit upload here, upload some files. Yeah, let's upload that right there. Okay, so maybe this spreadsheet has to do with our retirement benefits. Now, people can always come in here, they can add new files, they can work on these files, but as site owners, what can we do to make this as useful as possible for people? Well, if we click the gear in the top right-hand corner, you'll notice that library settings is one of my options on this gear. If you have an earlier version of SharePoint, you might have a library tab with library settings on it. So go to library settings and just take a glance around here. Notice that one of the more important ones, probably, at least to me, is the versioning to your documents. Because think about it. If you've got really important documents in this library, how important is it to you to know whether or not you can revert to an old version of this document? So I go in here to versioning settings, and as you can see right here, by default in my Office 365 install, my document version history is set to yes, create new major versions every time I edit a file up to 500 versions of this document. Now, those of you who've got local installations internally at your company, you can be almost guaranteed that this is not the default where you are. Where you are, you probably have your versioning turned off by default, so that the next time somebody makes a change to a document, it just changes and nobody can revert back to the old copy of it. So you want to come in here and think to yourself, okay, do I need to version the documents in here? Is it important that if Bob in accounting comes in and messes something up, that I can always go back to an older copy of the document? If so, definitely turn on your major versions. But also, you'll probably want to get in touch with somebody in IT to see what their advice is as to the number of major versions. Because this is the online version of SharePoint, they're not keeping me to any specific number of versions, and it's not hurting me in terms of file storage. But those of you guys who've got installs locally at your company, you probably don't want to hold on to 500 copies of every document. That is a lot of file storage space. So definitely look into it. I would say that typically, somewhere around 10 or 20 versions will be a good thing, because by the time you come back to this, if you realize that there was a mistake, reverting back 2 or 3 or even 5 copies of this document in the past is still very helpful to us. As a quick point here, I typically skip over the minor versions for something short and simple like this. But if you're in a situation where your team needs to have minor copies, draft copies of a document before you publish the major version of that document, you could look into the idea of keeping both major and minor versions of the document. Typically, though, in a standard collaborative environment, you only need major versions to be able to go back from before when somebody made some change. So we have the ability to customize both our lists and our libraries and how they work by going to the library settings and by going into the list settings, changing views, changing version history, etc. Now let's take it to the next level. Let's go back to the home link over here on the left-hand side. Up until this point in the process, we haven't been looking at the front page of the SharePoint site. What have we been doing? We've been setting up security, we've been creating lists and libraries, and we've been customizing those lists and libraries. But now let's really look at how a new user to our SharePoint site lands on our SharePoint site. They come to this homepage because they go to andersonwiley.sharepoint.com/sites/human resources, or HR. And they say to themselves, what am I supposed to do? And how do they know what to do? Well, the first thing they can do is they can look at the page that's right here in front of them. Notice here they've got kind of a news stream that we could add. We've got little links here like, what is a team site? How do I add a page? What's our previous activity been like? None of these things, to my mind, are really helping a user get their job done quickly. So when you land on a SharePoint homepage like this, as the site owner, one of the most important things you can do is make this page as useful as possible and as easy to use as possible. So let's click on Edit right up here in the top right. We're going to edit this page. And here, I'm literally going to throw away with this little trash can right here, that news area, yeah, get rid of that thing. This activity area, yeah, get rid of that thing. Okay, so we have effectively a blank sheet of paper. What's going to work for us here? Well, if I click right here on the plus sign, I can say, do I want to add some text? Do I want to add a picture? Do I want to add some highlighted content? Let's add text first. Okay, something like, welcome to the public HR site. Okay. Now, below the welcome message, and you could type in a little welcome message. You could bold this or even make it a heading. Okay, you get the picture from there, right? So you are typing content into there, welcoming them, maybe put a picture on there. Okay, so typing messages is nice, but it's not particularly useful. What's really useful here is if I give them things like their retirement benefits or their health benefits quickly. How would I do that? I click the little plus sign here below the welcome message, and I say, oh, here is a document library. I click on Add a Document Library, and I say, oh, show them the health benefits right there. And it loads up the health benefits right here for me. And then I click the little plus sign, and I say, oh yeah, show me the document library for their retirement benefits. Just like that. Boom, retirement benefits, boom, health benefits, right underneath the welcome. And I save it. And that's that. I've made this page more useful by giving them a welcome message and then an immediate view into the documents around their health benefits and the documents around their retirement benefits. Customizing the home page to give them the most useful tools possible as quickly as possible is incredibly helpful. So what can we do besides customizing this home page? We can make it easier to get to other places. So you don't want to put everything on the home page. Everybody, make sure that you just put a couple of relevant elements on the home page, and then everything else they need to be able to navigate to. So you look over here on the navigation panel on the left, and for example, you don't see the employee list over here, right? So let's go over to our site contents and go to our current employee list. So we're on our current employee list right here, and we see that we have current employees listed underneath recent in the left-hand navigation. Let's click on Edit Links right here. And when we click on Edit Links, we can take our current employees and drag it right up here underneath Documents, just like that. And then save it, and our current employees are now right there in our navigation scheme. Or, this is kind of fun too. Let's go click on Atlanta, for example. So now we have just the current employees who work in Atlanta. We can come up here to the address bar and copy this address. Notice it ends in atlanta.aspx. Click on Edit Links, and let's click on the link right here and type in Atlanta-based employees, and then paste the address that we just copied, the one that ends in atlanta.aspx. Click OK. And then just take your Atlanta-based employees and put them underneath current employees. You see that right there? And save. Look at that. Current employees with Atlanta-based employees nested underneath it. Let's go over to New York. You know what I'm about to do here. Copy the address. Click on Edit Links down here at the bottom and choose the little plus sign with the link. Put in New York-based employees and put in the address. And click OK. And then drag New York-based employees right here underneath Atlanta-based employees. And save. So now think about your navigation system. Let's go back to the home page. So we're here on the home page. We see, as a new user, welcome to the site. Here's the information you need about your health benefits. Here's the information you need about your retirement benefits. Okay, those are good, and I appreciate that, but actually, I needed to see who my employees are. Well, if you go over here on the left, you've got your current employees, and you can click the little down arrow there. Oh, show me all the Atlanta employees. I click on Atlanta-based employees, and there it is. There is a direct link to just those employees who work in Atlanta. So this ties multiple things together. We had our SharePoint site and we decided we needed an employee list. We decided we needed a health benefits library. We decided we needed a retirement benefits library. Now it was up to us from that point on to make those things as useful as possible to people. So some of the ways we did that were to customize those lists and libraries, to change the settings on the libraries so that they held on to versions of documents, to change the settings on the list so that we could see a filtered view of our employees. But then we went a step further and we customized just the interaction with the site so that somebody who's new to the site immediately sees what their health benefits are, immediately sees what their retirement benefits are, and has a direct link not only to all the employees, but to certain subsets of employees along the way. So at the beginning of today's session, I told you needed to understand what SharePoint was. You needed to understand the permissions that you'd put into SharePoint. You need to be able to add essential tools and customize those tools, making it easy to understand the collaboration environment for your coworkers. Now, here's the last thing I told you needed to do. You need to promote it. You need to sell it to your coworkers. They need to buy into the fact that they should be putting documents into libraries, the fact that they should be putting their contacts into SharePoint. So how can you sell that? Well, let's open Outlook, for example. So I've got a contact list in Outlook, of course, right? I go down here, click on my contact link, and here are my contacts in Outlook. But let's say that Ivan and Teresa and Elisa here, these are all really important vendors that the rest of my team need to be able to get in contact with as well. Watch how easy this next part is. So I'm going to go into SharePoint. I'm going to make a new app. Remember, you can click the gear in the top right-hand corner and click on Add an App. And let's go ahead and add a contact list full of vendors. And click Create. So we have this contact list full of vendors, and we could definitely manually add vendors to this list. But watch what you can also do. I'm going to go to List up here at the top, and you notice right here there's this option that says you can connect this vendor list directly to Outlook. I'm going to click that link, Connect to Outlook, and open it in Outlook 2016. It asks me the question, okay, so hey, we were just contacted by SharePoint. Would you like to connect the SharePoint contact list to your Outlook? Click Yes. And you see that right here under Other Contacts, we now have our human resources list called Vendors. And notice there's nobody in there. But I just said, let me go back to my contacts. I just said that Ivan, Teresa, and Elisa are all important vendors. So I'm going to drag Ivan and drag him right over to vendors. Click on Teresa and drag her right over to vendors. And click on Elisa and drag her right over to vendors. Now when I go to my vendor contact list in Outlook, I see Ivan, Teresa, and Elisa. And what's more, when I go back to SharePoint, if I refresh this page, instantly I have Ivan Haas, Teresa Middleton, and Elisa Vanover instantly there and available. Do you see how fast and easy that was? So now your whole team can get together, put their favorite contacts into a universal contact list that's held in SharePoint, and they can all connect to it. These are the little things that you can find in SharePoint that will sell your team on it much, much more quickly. So if you'll take a moment and remember with me, I wanted to start today by understanding where SharePoint fit with you and what kinds of tools you had at your disposal. Hopefully now you can see where when your teams need to be able to collaborate, to share information back and forth, there are tools in lists and libraries to allow you to make that happen. When you need to set up permissions, the first level of understanding in SharePoint is that there are site owners, members, and visitors, and that each one of those has a unique permission level. If necessary, you can build your own permission level and your own groups so that there can be groups of people internally that can, let's say, approve documents or that can edit the permissions on a SharePoint site or that can upload but can't delete content. By being able to revamp these essential building block tools, by being able to create a list and then change the views on that list, being able to create a library and change the versioning settings on that library, or being able to take those lists and libraries and make them very accessible through the home page or through the navigation system on the left, you make it easier for people to interact with your SharePoint site, to see what they should be trying to accomplish, and get the job done. What's more, by integrating SharePoint into something like Microsoft Outlook, you make it incredibly easy, even drag and drop easy, for us to interact with things like contact lists. I want to make sure that these skills actually implant and allow you to accomplish something useful. So please let me know if there's any way that I can help you. help@knactraining.com. Thanks so much for your time. Have a great day.